Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. Genesis 45:3. The moment hung in the air, heavy with disbelief. The brothers, who had once plotted against him, now stood before the very man they had wronged. Joseph, once a slave and prisoner, had risen to power in Egypt. He held their fates in his hands. The weight of betrayal and the hope of reconciliation collided in that charged moment. But to understand how we got here, we have to go back to the very beginning of Joseph's life. His story begins in Canaan, where he was the favored son of Jacob. Born to Rachel, Jacob's beloved wife, Joseph was loved more than his brothers. Genesis 37 verse 3 tells us, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age." This favoritism sowed the seeds of jealousy and resentment. His brothers hated him for it. Joseph was not just any son, he was a dreamer. At just 17, he had visions that would alter the course of his life. One night, he dreamt of binding sheaves in the field, and his sheaf stood upright while his brothers' sheaves bowed down to it. When he shared his dream, they responded with scorn, saying, "Shall you indeed reign over us?" Genesis 37:8. The tension was palpable. Jealousy turned to plot. The brothers conspired against Joseph. They seized him and threw him into a pit, intending to leave him there to die. But instead, they sold him to Midianite traders for 20 shekels of silver. This act of treachery was more than a betrayal, it was a severing of family ties. Genesis 37:28 records, "So when the Midianite merchants came by, they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver." Joseph's journey to Egypt was marked by hardship. In a foreign land, he was bought by Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. Yet even as a slave, God was with him. Genesis 39:2 states, "The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man." Joseph prospered in Potiphar's house, gaining trust and responsibility. But the trials were far from over. Potiphar's wife falsely accused him, leading to his imprisonment. The years passed, and Joseph remained in chains, yet the Lord did not abandon him. His ability to interpret dreams became his lifeline. In prison, he interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. He foretold the cupbearer's restoration, and as time passed, it came to pass. But Joseph was forgotten. Genesis 40:23 ends with these words, "Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him." 2 full years later, Pharaoh had dreams that troubled him. No one in his court could interpret them. Then the cupbearer remembered Joseph and spoke of him to Pharaoh, saying, "I remember my offenses today." Genesis 41:9. Joseph was summoned, and in a moment his life changed again. He stood before Pharaoh, interpreting dreams that foretold 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. Pharaoh recognized the divine wisdom in Joseph and made him second in command over all Egypt. Now, we return to the moment before Joseph and his brothers. They had come to Egypt seeking grain during the famine, unaware that the brother they had betrayed was their savior. The question loomed, what did God require of Joseph, and what did it cost him? Joseph's journey was not merely one of personal triumph. It was a testament to God's providence, faithfulness, and the power of forgiveness. As we delve deeper into Joseph's life, we will explore these themes, tracing the hand of God through every trial, betrayal, and ultimate reconciliation. Each chapter reveals the intricate tapestry of divine purpose, woven through suffering and faith. In the land of Canaan, where the sun scorched the earth and the fertile valleys cradled life, a boy named Joseph was born into a family steeped in history and promise. He was the favored son of Jacob, who was also called Israel, the grandson of Abraham. As Genesis 37:3 tells us, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. This coat was more than mere fabric. It was a symbol of Jacob's affection and a source of jealousy among Joseph's 10 older brothers. The village of Hebron, where they lived, was a bustling settlement with an estimated population of around 2,000 people. It was a place where shepherds tended their flocks and farmers cultivated the land. The history of this region is supported by archaeological findings at the nearby site of Tel Hebron, where excavations reveal remnants of homes, storage facilities, and altars dating back to the patriarchal period. This was a world where the echoes of Abraham's covenant with God still resonated, where the promise of numerous descendants and a land flowing with milk and honey was a living reality. Jacob, a man of deep faith and complexity, had his own struggles. He had wrestled with God at Peniel, receiving the name Israel after that transformative encounter. Genesis 32:28. His life was marked by both divine favor and personal failures. He was a man who loved fiercely and yet bore the scars of deception and rivalry with his brother Esau. Now, as a father of 12 sons, he had a special place in his heart for Joseph, as he had been born to him in his old age. This favoritism, however, sowed seeds of bitterness and resentment in the hearts of Joseph's brothers. Among Joseph's brothers were Reuben, the eldest, who was impulsive but marked by a sense of responsibility; Simeon and Levi, who were fierce and uncompromising; Judah, who possessed a natural leadership quality; and the rest, who each bore their own traits, some overshadowed by the older siblings. The dynamics within the family were fraught with tension. Genesis 37:4 states, "And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him, and could not speak peaceably unto him." The jealousy that grew within them was a tangible force, stirring discontent and leading to eventual betrayal. Joseph, on the other hand, was a dreamer. He experienced visions that foretold his future, dreams that spoke of his brothers bowing down to him. Genesis 37:7. These dreams were not mere fantasies, they were echoes of God's divine plan for Joseph's life. They ignited further animosity from his brothers, who interpreted these visions as arrogance. They could not see the hand of God at work, nor the protection that would be needed for Joseph's future. The family's economic conditions were tied to the pastoral life they led. They depended on their flocks for sustenance, trading livestock and agricultural produce at the local markets. In this context, Joseph's coat of many colors was not just a mark of favoritism, but a representation of their wealth. This coat set him apart, making him a target for envy and scorn. The brothers, struggling with their own insecurities, could not abide their youngest sibling's favored status. One fateful day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers while they tended the flocks near Shechem, approximately 50 miles from Hebron. This distance marked the beginning of a series of trials that would shape Joseph's destiny. As Genesis 37:14 recounts, "And he said to him, Go, I pray thee, see whether it be well with thy brethren and well with the flocks, and bring me word again." Joseph set out eagerly, unaware of the plot that awaited him. When he arrived at Shechem, he learned that his brothers had moved on to Dothan, about 10 miles further. The journey to find them was a test of perseverance. When he approached, they saw him from a distance. Genesis 37:18 says, "And when they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him." Fueled by jealousy, they plotted to eliminate the source of their torment. In the minds of the brothers, Joseph had become a symbol of their father's favoritism. They could no longer tolerate the idea of their younger sibling rising above them. It was Reuben, the firstborn, who intervened, suggesting that they should throw Joseph into a pit instead of killing him. His intention was to rescue Joseph later, Genesis 37:21-22. However, the brothers agreed to sell Joseph to a caravan of Ishmaelites, traveling to Egypt for 20 shekels of silver, Genesis 37:28. This act of betrayal was a pivotal moment, one that would set the course for Joseph's life and the destiny of a nation. The caravan journeyed south, carrying Joseph away from his homeland. He was now a slave in a foreign land, far from the warmth of his father's household. This transition marks the beginning of a profound crisis. In Egypt, Joseph would face trials that would test his character, his faith, and ultimately prepare him for a significant role in God's plan. The Israelites were living under the rule of Pharaoh, who reigned over a powerful kingdom marked by wealth and grandeur. The population of Egypt during this time was likely several million, and the society was built upon agriculture, trade, and a complex hierarchy. The Egyptians revered their gods, and Pharaoh was seen as a divine figure, a god on earth. The splendor of the Egyptian civilization, with its monumental architecture and elaborate rituals, stood in stark contrast to Joseph's humble beginnings in Hebron. In the midst of these monumental changes, God's hand was at work. Joseph, despite his circumstances, remained steadfast in his faith. Genesis 39:2 states, "And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian." Even as a slave, Joseph found favor and success, demonstrating that God's presence can transform even the direst situations into opportunities for growth. Joseph was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. This position placed Joseph in a household of influence and power. Potiphar recognized Joseph's capability and entrusted him with the management of his estate. Joseph's diligence and integrity shone through, and soon he was overseeing all that Potiphar owned. In Genesis 39:4 it is written, "And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand." Yet with success came temptation. Potiphar's wife, attracted to Joseph's youth and charisma, attempted to seduce him. She sought to draw him into a web of deceit. Joseph, grounded in his faith, resisted her advances, declaring, "How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" Genesis 39:9. His refusal to succumb to temptation was a testament to his character, yet it ultimately led to his downfall. In a moment of deceit, Potiphar's wife falsely accused Joseph of wrongdoing, claiming he had assaulted her. Angered, Potiphar had Joseph thrown into prison, a place of darkness and despair. Genesis 39:20 records, "And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison." Joseph's life seemed to spiral downward into chaos. The dreams that once filled him with hope now felt distant and unattainable. In this prison, surrounded by darkness, Joseph's faith did not waver. He continued to trust in God's plan, believing that his trials were not without purpose. Genesis 39 verse 21 proclaims, "But the Lord was with Joseph, and showed him mercy, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison." Even in confinement, Joseph found favor and was appointed to oversee the other prisoners. His ability to interpret dreams would soon resurface, leading to a divine appointment that would change the course of his life once again. As time passed, Joseph encountered two fellow prisoners, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker of Pharaoh. Both had fallen out of favor with the king and found themselves in the same prison. One night, they each had troubling dreams, and troubled by their meanings, they turned to Joseph for help. The chief cupbearer recounted his dream, and Joseph, through God's guidance, interpreted it favorably, assuring him he would be restored to his position. Genesis 40, verse 12-13. Joseph's interpretation of the baker's dream, however, was grim. He foretold that the baker would be executed, Genesis 40:19. These interpretations were accurate, fulfilling Joseph's prophetic gift. As the cupbearer was reinstated, Joseph implored him to remember him and to speak to Pharaoh on his behalf. Genesis 40, verse 14. Yet the cupbearer forgot Joseph, leaving him in prison for 2 more years, a reminder that God's timing is not always aligned with human expectations. In the depths of despair, Joseph clung to his faith. He had been betrayed, imprisoned, and forgotten, yet God was not absent. The life of Joseph serves as a testament to resilience, faith, and the intricate workings of divine providence. Each event, each trial, was preparing him for a destiny far greater than he could imagine. As the sands of time sifted through the hourglass, Joseph's story was far from over. The God who had placed dreams in his heart would awaken them once more, leading Joseph from the prison to the palace. His journey would become a powerful narrative of God's sovereignty, a story of redemption that would echo through generations. The origins of Joseph's life were steeped in promise and peril, setting the stage for a legacy that would impact not only his family, but the entire nation of Egypt and beyond. In the quiet of the night, as Joseph lay in the prison cell, he could not have known the great plans God had for him. The trials he faced were not in vain. They were the crucible that would forge him into a leader, a man of faith who would stand before Pharaoh and ultimately save his family from famine. Joseph's life reminds us that even in our darkest moments, God is present, working all things together for good. As Romans 8:28 assures us, "And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose." The story of Joseph, rooted in history and faith, unfolds like a tapestry woven by the hands of the Almighty, each thread representing a moment in time, a lesson in trust, and a testament to the enduring power of God's purpose. And as we close this chapter, we reflect on the truth that our beginnings, no matter how humble or fraught with challenge, can lead to a destiny shaped by divine grace. In the year 1878 BC, a time of uncertainty and transition loomed over the ancient Near East. The land was rife with shifting powers and emerging kingdoms. Egypt was on the rise, while Canaan remained a patchwork of tribes and familial alliances. Amid this backdrop of political and social change, God's purpose began to unfold through the life of Joseph. Joseph stood in Pharaoh's court, the weight of his new authority pressing down upon him. He was no longer the favored son of Jacob, but a man of influence, second only to Pharaoh himself. Yet, the path to this moment had been fraught with trials and tribulations, each step a test of faith and resilience. God had been present in every hardship, guiding Joseph toward a destiny greater than he could have imagined. It was in this time of newfound power that God called Joseph to a pivotal mission. Genesis 41:46 records, Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He had not forgotten his family in Canaan, or the dreams that had once troubled him. The memories of his brother's betrayal still lingered, yet he understood that he had been placed in this position for a divine purpose. In the quiet of his chambers, Joseph sought God. He prayed for wisdom, understanding the weight of the famine prophesied in Pharaoh's dreams. God's voice came to him, a quiet yet powerful assurance that he was to prepare Egypt for the coming years of scarcity. As Genesis 41:30-31 reveals, there will come 7 years of great abundance throughout all the land of Egypt, but after them there will arise 7 years of famine. This was Joseph's calling, to be the steward of Egypt's future, to gather grain and prepare for the impending crisis. But this calling came at a cost. Joseph knew that the burden of leadership would not only affect him, but would ripple through his family and beyond. He recalled his brothers, the pain of betrayal, and the longing for reconciliation. Would he be able to bear the weight of his past, while fulfilling God's command? As he knelt in prayer, Joseph wrestled with the gravity of his mission. "Here I am," he whispered, echoing the words of those who had come before him when called by God. In Genesis 41:16, he had boldly declared to Pharaoh, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." He recognized that his wisdom was a gift from God, not his own. The struggle within him was palpable. He was a man of faith, yet human frailty tugged at his heart. As the years passed, Joseph remained steadfast in his calling. He implemented the strategies God revealed to him, building storehouses and gathering grain during the 7 years of abundance. Genesis 40:47 tells us, "During the 7 plentiful years the earth produced abundantly. The fields of Egypt flourished, and grain filled the granaries." This was not mere luck. It was the hand of God guiding Joseph, fulfilling his promise through the obedience of his servant. However, as the famine struck, the world outside Egypt began to change. The surrounding nations faced dire consequences. Canaan, once a fertile land, turned barren. The people suffered as crops failed. Jacob, in Hebron, received news of the devastation. His heart ached for his sons. Genesis 42:1-2 reveals, "When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, 'Why do you look at one another? I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy for us that we may live and not die.'" This desperation would set the stage for a reunion that was divinely orchestrated. As the famine deepened, Joseph's brothers journeyed to Egypt, unaware of the identity of the man they would meet. They entered the grain storehouses, and the sight of their brother, now a powerful figure, would test their hearts and lead them toward reconciliation. Joseph recognized them immediately. His heart raced, a whirlwind of emotions surging within him: anger, betrayal, yet a longing for his family. He concealed his identity, observing their interactions, listening to their conversations, and noting the remorse they carried. Genesis 42:21 reveals their admission. "In truth, we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen." God had used this moment to stir their hearts, bringing them to a place of repentance. The days turned into weeks as Joseph engaged with them, testing their character and commitment to one another. He saw the change in his brother Judah, who spoke up for Benjamin, their youngest sibling, echoing the sacrifice of love. Genesis 44:33 captures this moment. Now therefore, please let your servant remain, instead of the boy as a servant to my lord, and let the boy go up with his brothers. Joseph's heart softened, recognizing the transformation in the men who had once cast him into a pit. Finally, the moment came. Joseph could no longer contain his emotions. He revealed his identity in a powerful declaration, as recorded in Genesis 45:3. I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? The brothers trembled before him, fear gripping their hearts. Would he seek revenge for their betrayal? The air was thick with tension, but Joseph's response was one of grace and understanding. In Genesis 45:4-5, he invited them closer, saying, "Come near to me, please." The grace of God flowed through Joseph as he reassured them, "Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life." This was God's ultimate purpose revealed, a plan woven through pain and hardship. The reunion led to a restoration of the family. Joseph's calling had not only saved Egypt, but had brought reconciliation to his family. The family of Israel was reunited, and the promise of God began to take shape within the lineage of Jacob. Genesis 46:26-27 tells us, all the persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70. A nation was being formed, and God's hand was evident in every step. As the years passed, Joseph remained in Egypt, a leader who recognized the sovereignty of God over his life. Genesis 50:20 encapsulates this truth. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive. Joseph understood that his journey, filled with trials and triumphs, was part of God's greater narrative. The legacy of Joseph's life continued to influence generations. His story became a testament to faith, perseverance, and the redemptive power of God. The people of Israel would tell of Joseph, a man who rose from the pit to the palace, who navigated the complexities of human relationships, and who ultimately fulfilled his calling through divine guidance. In Egypt, the years of abundance transformed into a prosperous nation, but the memory of the famine lingered. The people revered Joseph, and the Pharaoh honored him, recognizing the wisdom that had saved the land. The temple in Memphis, a center of worship, flourished as a symbol of God's provision. The people would gather to offer sacrifices, acknowledging the hand of God in their lives. As Joseph approached the end of his journey at the age of 110, he reflected on the faithfulness of God. He had seen the hand of God in every season of his life. Genesis 50:24 records his final words, "I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land, to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." Joseph's faith extended beyond his lifetime, a promise of hope for his people. Joseph's life was a tapestry of divine intervention and human struggle. The calling he received shaped not only his destiny, but the destiny of his family and the nation of Israel. His story reminds us that God is always at work, weaving our experiences into his grand design. Even in our darkest moments, his light shines through, guiding us toward our purpose. As the evening deepens and the moments of Joseph's life linger in our hearts, let us remember that God's calling often comes with challenges. Yet, through faith and obedience, we can trust in his plan, knowing that our struggles may lead to a legacy greater than ourselves. In every chapter of our lives, may we embrace the calling God has placed upon us, just as Joseph did, allowing his hand to guide us through every trial and triumph. Joseph stood in the grand halls of Pharaoh's palace, the weight of his position heavy upon his shoulders. It was now the second year of famine, and the cries of the hungry echoed throughout Egypt. As Genesis 41:54 states, the famine was so severe that it affected all the surrounding countries. Joseph had interpreted Pharaoh's dreams and, under God's guidance, had prepared for the coming disaster. But now, as the overseer of grain, he faced an immense crisis. The famine had gripped not just Egypt, but the lands beyond its borders. People came from far and wide to seek sustenance. They traveled dusty roads, carrying their hope for survival. The people of Canaan, including Joseph's own family, were desperate. Jacob, their father, had heard that grain was available in Egypt. In Genesis 42, 1-2, it is written, "When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, 'Why do you keep looking at each other? I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us.'" With heavy hearts, 10 of Joseph's brothers prepared to journey to Egypt, leaving behind their youngest brother, Benjamin, who was the only other son of Rachel. The memory of their betrayal haunted them, but hunger drove them forward. They could not imagine that the brother they had sold into slavery was now the very man who held their lives in his hands. As they approached the Egyptian city, they were met by the sight of long lines of weary travelers. The air was thick with desperation. Joseph stood in his royal attire, a sharp contrast to the raggedness of the men before him. He recognized them immediately. The faces of Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah stirred a whirlwind of emotions within him. He was no longer the favored son of Jacob, but a powerful leader in Egypt. Yet, in this moment, he could not forget the betrayal that had led him to this place. He spoke harshly to them, as recorded in Genesis 42:7. "You are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected." The accusation struck them like a blow, igniting their fears and shame. "No, my lord," they pleaded in response. "Your servants have come to buy food. We are all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies." Joseph's heart ached. He wanted to reveal himself, to embrace his brothers, but the memories of their treachery weighed heavily upon him. He needed to see if their hearts had changed. "You are spies," he repeated, "and this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here." Genesis 42:15. Panic filled the brothers. They whispered among themselves, recalling their past sins. "Surely we are being punished because of our brother," Reuben said. "We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen." Genesis 42:21-22. Their guilt came rushing back, and they were ensnared in a web of their own making. Joseph understood their turmoil, but remained firm. He ordered them to be imprisoned for 3 days. The weight of his decision pressed on him like a stone. He felt the conflict of his own heart. Was he to act with vengeance or mercy? The brothers were confined, their lives hanging in the balance, yet they were preserved by the grace of God. On the 3rd day, Joseph released them from prison, but kept Simeon as collateral. He filled their sacks with grain and commanded they return to Canaan, bringing Benjamin back with them. Genesis 42:24 records, "He turned away from them and began to weep." In that moment, Joseph wrestled with his emotions, longing for reconciliation, yet feeling the sting of betrayal. As the brothers prepared to return home, they discovered the silver they had used to pay for the grain concealed in their sacks. Fear gripped them. "What is this that God has done to us?" they cried out. Genesis 42:28. Their situation had twisted into a deeper crisis. They had traveled to Egypt seeking food, yet they returned with a sense of impending doom hanging over them. When they arrived home, they recounted the events to Jacob. The old man's heart sank. "You have deprived me of my children," he lamented. "If harm comes to Benjamin on the journey, you will bring my grey head down to the grave in sorrow." Genesis 42:36. The stakes were high. The fate of their family rested in the balance, and Jacob's anguish echoed throughout their household. Days turned into weeks as the famine persisted. The family's supplies dwindled, and the spectre of despair loomed larger. In Genesis 43:2, it states, "When they had eaten all the grain they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, 'Go back and buy us a little more food.'" The brothers knew they must return to Egypt. They had no choice. But they would have to bring Benjamin with them, a prospect that filled them with dread. In the depths of their hearts, doubt festered. Would they face Joseph once more? Would he remember their betrayal? How would they plead for mercy? The thought of returning to the very man who had power over life and death weighed heavily on them. As they readied themselves for the journey, Judah stepped forward, saying in Genesis 43:8-9, "Send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety." Judah's resolve demonstrated a profound transformation. He was willing to sacrifice himself for the sake of his brother, a stark contrast to the betrayal they had once committed. With heavy hearts, they set out for Egypt once again. Each mile was a reminder of their past sins, echoing in their minds. They arrived at the same gates where they had encountered Joseph before. Fear and trepidation clung to their hearts. Joseph, meanwhile, awaited their return. When he saw Benjamin with them, his heart stirred. He ordered a feast, a banquet in his own home, and there he would test their hearts yet again. As they entered, they were filled with dread, expecting punishment, but Joseph approached them with kindness, offering them food. They could not fathom the depth of his emotions as he watched Benjamin, the brother he had never known growing up. In the midst of the meal, Joseph could hold back no more. He began to weep. Genesis 43:30 says, deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. The tears flowed freely, a mixture of joy and pain. He was confronted by the reality of his past and the hope of redemption. Yet he had to reveal his identity carefully. The moment of truth loomed, and he needed to ensure his brothers had truly changed. The crisis deepened when he devised a plan to determine their hearts. He would place his silver cup in Benjamin's sack and accuse him of theft. This action would test whether they would abandon Benjamin as they had abandoned him. As the brothers departed, they were pursued. The cup was found, and the brothers were brought back before Joseph. In Genesis 44:16, they pleaded, "What can we say to my Lord? What can we speak? How can we prove our innocence?" They were ensnared in a moment of despair, facing the consequences of their past. The crisis was at its peak. Joseph had the power to punish them, to imprison them as he had been imprisoned, but he was also filled with the hope of reconciliation. Could he trust that they had changed? Would they stand together as brothers, or would they repeat the mistakes of the past? In their darkest hour, Judah stepped forward, pleading for Benjamin's life. He offered to take his place as a servant, stating in Genesis 44:33, "Now then, please let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers." His willingness to sacrifice himself for Benjamin marked a profound change in their hearts. Joseph could hold back no longer. The moment of truth had come. In Genesis 45, verse 1-2, it states, "Then Joseph could no longer control himself. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him. He revealed his identity, saying, 'I am Joseph. Is my father still living?' The brothers were stunned. Fear gripped them as they realized the brother they had betrayed now held their fate in his hands. But Joseph, in this moment of crisis, chose forgiveness. "Do not be distressed. It was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you," he declared. Genesis 45, verse 5. His understanding of God's providence transformed the situation from one of despair to one of hope. The crisis had tested them, but it had also brought about a transformation. They had journeyed through betrayal, hunger, and fear. Yet they emerged on the other side, not as enemies, but as brothers, united in purpose and love. As the story unfolded, it became evident that God's hand was at work throughout their trials. The future of Israel rested on these moments, and through Joseph's trials, God prepared a nation for the generations to come. In the depths of crisis, God's plan unfolded, bringing forth redemption and reconciliation. The narrative of Joseph is not just one of individual triumph, but of God's overarching sovereignty in the lives of his people. His journey through crisis and the choices made by his brothers remind us of the power of forgiveness and the profound grace that can arise from the ashes of betrayal. This is the beauty of the biblical narrative, the promise of restoration, the hope of redemption, and the assurance that our God is always at work, even in the darkest moments. As we reflect on Joseph's life, we are reminded that no crisis is beyond God's reach, and he is ever present, guiding us through every challenge we face. The second year of famine was relentless. The land of Canaan, once rich with grazing flocks, now lay desolate. Jacob looked upon his dwindling household and felt the weight of despair. The crops had failed, and the well of hope seemed to dry up. His sons, weary from their journeys to Egypt, returned with grim news. "We cannot go again without Benjamin," they told him. "The man who is lord over the land warned us, saying, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you.'" Genesis 43:5. And so the brothers sat in silence, recalling their past sins against Joseph. Reuben, the eldest, spoke up. "I told you not to harm him. Now our brother Simeon is in prison, and we risk losing Benjamin as well." Each brother's heart filled with guilt as they reflected on their betrayal, the echo of Joseph's cries still haunting them. Meanwhile, in Egypt, Joseph faced the burden of leadership. He had risen to power, yet his heart was heavy. Each day brought a new wave of visitors needing grain, their faces often reminding him of his own brothers. The cries of the hungry rang in his ears. Joseph's heart longed for reconciliation, but he also needed to test their sincerity, to see if they had truly changed. Then came the day when Jacob reluctantly allowed Benjamin to accompany his brothers to Egypt. "If I am bereaved, he said, surrendering his fears to the will of God. They set out once again toward the land of their estranged brother, the shadows of their past trailing behind them like specters. As the brothers approached Joseph's palace, they trembled. They had come to buy grain, but they were met with an overwhelming sense of dread. "We must plead for mercy," Judah urged. "This man is powerful, and we must confess our sins." They bowed before Joseph, the one they had wronged, who now stood in authority over them. Joseph, recognizing them, but concealing his identity, spoke harshly. "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." Their hearts sank further. "No, my lord," they said. "We are honest men. We have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. Our youngest brother is with our father in Canaan." Joseph's heart stirred within him. He remembered the dreams God had given him, dreams of his brothers bowing before him. Yet, he needed to know if they had truly repented. He devised a plan, speaking to them through an interpreter to maintain his facade. "You will be tested," he declared. "One of you shall remain here, while the rest return with your youngest brother." As they were locked away for 3 days, the weight of their sins pressed heavily upon them. They could hear the whispers of their own guilt. "Truly, we are guilty concerning our brother," they lamented. "We saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not listen." Genesis 42:21. God had begun to move in their hearts, stirring up the memories of their betrayal. On the 3rd day, Joseph took pity on them. "Do this and live," he said, "for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined while the rest of you go and carry grain for the famine of your households. But bring your youngest brother to me, so your words may be verified." Genesis 42:18-20. His heart ached for Benjamin, the brother he had never known. The brothers returned to Canaan, hearts heavy with the burden of their guilt and the uncertainty of their future. They recounted their ordeal to Jacob, who was not willing to part with Benjamin. "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin?" Genesis 42:36. Jacob's anguish was palpable. The weight of grief hung over him like a dark cloud. Yet famine pressed on, and soon Jacob was compelled to act. "If I must lose him, I will lose him," he finally relented. They packed their carts with gifts for the man in Egypt, including balm, honey, spices, myrrh, nuts, and almonds, items of great value in those days. Genesis 43:11. The journey back was fraught with anxiety, but they prayed for God's mercy. Upon their return to Egypt, Joseph's heart raced as he saw Benjamin among them. In that moment, he could no longer contain himself. "I am Joseph," he declared. "Is my father still alive?" Genesis 45:3. The brothers were struck with silence, their hearts pounding. They could not believe what they heard. Their minds raced back to the pit, the sale, the lies they had told their father. Joseph, seeing their fear, spoke gently to them. "Do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life." Genesis 45:5. His words echoed with the weight of divine purpose. God had orchestrated these events for a greater plan, ensuring that many lives would be saved during the famine. The air thickened with awe as Joseph continued. "For these 2 years, the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance." Genesis 45:6-7. The realization of God's providence washed over the brothers like a wave of grace. In that moment, the brothers fell before Joseph, weeping and confessing their sins. Each brother, once filled with jealousy, now recognized the depth of their wrongdoing. Their hearts were transformed, and forgiveness flowed like a river. Joseph embraced each of them, tears mingling with laughter, signifying a reunion that had been long awaited. Joseph's journey from the pit to the palace was a testament to God's faithfulness. The ancient city of Memphis, where Joseph had risen to power, was known for its grandeur and prosperity, a stark contrast to the humble shepherding life of his youth in Hebron. The population of Memphis was estimated at around 50,000, a bustling center of trade and culture. Joseph's authority as governor was unprecedented, showcasing how God elevates the humble. The brothers returned to Canaan to bring Jacob to Egypt, where they would live in peace and prosperity. Joseph provided for them, ensuring that they lacked nothing. The family was reunited, and Jacob, upon seeing Joseph, declared, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face, because you are still alive." Genesis 46:30. Joseph's story illustrates how God can turn the darkest of situations into a glorious testimony of redemption. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was at work, weaving a tapestry of grace through the lives of his people. The reunion of Joseph and his brothers was not merely a family gathering, it was a divine appointment. God had turned their sorrow into joy. As they settled in the land of Goshen, surrounded by the abundance of Egypt, Jacob lived a life filled with gratitude. The promise given to Abraham was alive. God had preserved a remnant. The house of Israel would continue, and through Joseph, God provided the means for their survival. The scriptures remind us that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28. Joseph's life embodies this truth. Throughout his trials, he remained faithful, trusting in God's plan. Even in the face of betrayal and hardship, he held on to the dreams God had given him. Years passed, and Jacob lived to see his family flourish in Egypt. Joseph, now a man of great influence, never forgot the hand of God that guided him. He understood that his position was not for his glory, but for the glory of God, who had orchestrated everything for good. As Joseph approached the end of his life, he gathered his brothers and spoke to them. "I am about to die, but God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land to the land of which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." Genesis 50:24. With these words, he reaffirmed the covenant promise, ensuring that the legacy of faith would continue through his family. In his final moments, Joseph commanded his brothers, "Then you shall carry up my bones from here." Genesis 50:25. He knew that Egypt was not their home. The promise of Canaan awaited them, and he desired to be buried in the land God had given to their forefathers. Joseph lived to be 110 years old. When he died, the Egyptians mourned for him. His legacy endured, a testament to God's providence and unwavering love. His life story, marked by trials, triumphs, and the sovereign hand of God, continues to inspire faith. In the quiet of the night, let us reflect on Joseph's journey. From the pit of despair to the heights of power, his life exemplifies the faithfulness of God. Just as Joseph trusted in God's plan, we too can rest in his promises, knowing that he is always at work, weaving our stories into his grand design. As we drift into sleep, may we carry the hope of Joseph's legacy, a reminder that in every trial, God is present, guiding us toward our destined purpose. Joseph stood in the palace courtyard, the sun casting long shadows as he gazed down the road that led back to Canaan. He had spent years away, his heart heavy with the memories of betrayal and bitterness. But now, after revealing his true identity to his brothers, a new chapter awaited. Genesis 45:5 records his words, "Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life." His faith was evident, a testament to God's hand working through the darkest moments. The famine that had ravaged the land was not just a hardship for Egypt. It had reached far and wide, affecting neighboring territories. Archaeological evidence indicates that during this period, trade routes were disrupted, and many communities faced starvation. The Egyptian state, under Joseph's guidance, had become a lifeline. Grain stores filled to capacity during the 7 years of plenty provided sustenance for not only the Egyptians, but also for those who journeyed from distant lands. Genesis 41:57 states, "Moreover, all the earth came to Egypt to Joseph to buy grain, because the famine was severe over all the earth." Joseph's brothers returned home, laden with grain and a heavy burden of guilt. Their father Jacob, now older and wearier, received them with mixed feelings. Had they truly done right? Would they bear this secret forever? Genesis 42:36 recounts Jacob's lament. "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin." The pain of the past lingered, deepening with every reminder of their deception. Back in Canaan, Jacob's family began to rebuild. The scars of betrayal were evident, yet hope flickered in their hearts. Benjamin, once the baby of the family, had been spared the anguish of their treachery, but now faced uncertainty. The elders of Canaan, upon hearing of Joseph's rise to power, recognized the need for reconciliation. They were aware of the importance of aligning with Egypt for survival. The historical context reveals that alliances were often formed during hardship, and Joseph's leadership brought stability that many sought to align with. Joseph, now second only to Pharaoh, took swift action to ensure the well-being of his family. He sent carts to bring Jacob and the entire household to Egypt. Genesis 45:19-20 instructs, "And you shall say to your brothers, 'Do this, load your beasts, and go back to the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households, and come to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land.'" The promise of abundance filled their hearts with a glimmer of hope. As his family traveled to Egypt, Jacob's heart was filled with trepidation, but when he saw the carts, his spirit was revived. Genesis 45:28 records, "And Israel said, 'It is enough, Joseph my son is still alive. I will go and see him before I die.'" This moment marked a turning point. The family would reunite, but it would not be without challenges. As they crossed the border into Egypt, they were met with the grandeur of the royal city, an imposing backdrop against the backdrop of their past. Once settled in Goshen, the land Joseph had chosen for them, his family began to thrive. The archaeological record shows that this region was fertile and rich in resources, ideal for agriculture and shepherding. The Israelites flourished under Joseph's protection. Genesis 47:11 states, "Then Joseph settled his father and his brothers, and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded." Yet not all was smooth sailing. The surrounding nations watched with envy. The Canaanites, along with other tribes, grew wary of Egypt's growing power. They had witnessed the transformation of Joseph from a slave to a ruler, and now they feared his influence. Historical records indicate that Egypt became a center of trade and politics, drawing in merchants and diplomats from neighboring regions. Joseph's brothers adjusted to their new life, often reflecting on their past. The weight of their actions bore heavily on them. They found themselves in a foreign land, yet they were united by the bond of blood and the grace of forgiveness. Genesis 50:15 records their fears. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him." Their conscience was not clear, and they worried about retribution. Joseph, however, responded with grace. He reassured them, citing the divine purpose behind their treachery. Genesis 50:20 resounds with his faith. "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive." His words echoed throughout the land, a reminder that God's plan often unfolds through our trials. In the years that followed, Joseph continued to lead Egypt, implementing policies that would sustain the people and fortify the nation. He was known for his wisdom and discernment. Archaeologists have unearthed inscriptions that highlight the administrative reforms during Joseph's tenure, showcasing his foresight in managing resources during times of scarcity. The Egyptian people admired Joseph, but the memory of his rise from the depths of despair remained. They recognized the hand of God in his life. The Hebrew people prospered, growing in number and strength. They settled in Goshen, where they tended their flocks and cultivated the land. This prosperity, however, did not go unnoticed. The pharaohs who came after Joseph would view the Israelites with suspicion. As years turned into decades, Jacob's family thrived while the memories of their past lingered like a shadow. Joseph remained a figure of hope and reconciliation, an embodiment of God's faithfulness. The relationship with his brothers transformed as they learned to trust one another again. They often gathered, sharing stories of their youth and reflecting on how God had brought them together through unimaginable trials. The historical context reveals that Joseph lived to the age of 110, witnessing the growth of his family and the challenges that lay ahead. Genesis 50:22 recounts, "So Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years. His legacy was one of faith and resilience, a testament to the power of forgiveness and the divine purpose woven through their lives." When Joseph sensed his time was near, he gathered his brothers. He spoke of the covenant God had made with their forefathers. Genesis 50:24 captures his words, "I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land, to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." His faith in God's promise gave his family hope for the future, a promise that extended beyond the borders of Egypt. Joseph's death marked the end of an era. His body was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt, a practice that highlighted the reverence given to leaders and those of significance. Archaeological findings from the period reveal burial practices of the time, emphasizing the importance of honoring the dead. The Israelites mourned for him, their hearts heavy with gratitude for the man who had saved them. Yet, as time passed, the memory of Joseph began to fade. The subsequent pharaohs, unaware of Joseph's contributions, grew wary of the growing Hebrew population. They feared their strength and influence. Exodus 1:8 notes, "Now there arose a new king over Egypt, who did not know Joseph." This marked the beginning of a new chapter for the Israelites, one filled with struggle and hardship. Joseph's legacy, however, remained intact. His story continued to be told among the Israelites, a reminder of God's faithfulness. The themes of betrayal, forgiveness, and divine purpose echoed through the generations. As the Israelites faced oppression, they would remember how God had used Joseph to preserve their lineage. The surrounding nations watched as Egypt transformed into a land of both prosperity and oppression. The Israelites, now numerous, faced challenges that would test their faith and resilience. But they held on to the promise that had been passed down through their forefathers, a promise of deliverance, a hope that would one day be fulfilled. And in the quiet of the night, as the stars shone brightly over the land, the memory of Joseph lived on, a reminder that God's hand is ever present, guiding his people through trials, losses, and triumphs, shaping their destiny in ways they could not yet understand. In every story of struggle, there is a promise of hope, a legacy of faith, and the unwavering presence of the Lord. Joseph's journey culminated not just in his personal rise to power, but in a legacy that echoes through scripture and history, illuminating the path to Christ. His life, marked by suffering, betrayal, and eventual restoration, serves as a profound testament to God's sovereignty and redemptive plan. As Genesis 50:20 states, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today." This verse encapsulates the divine purpose woven through Joseph's trials, emphasizing that even in our darkest moments, God is at work for our good and his glory. After reuniting with his brothers, Joseph reveals his identity and reassures them. "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt," he declares in Genesis 45:4. His ability to forgive and embrace his family, despite their grievous betrayal, mirrors the forgiveness offered by Christ. Just as Joseph was a source of salvation for his family during famine, Jesus is the bread of life, offering eternal sustenance for all who believe. In John 6:35, Jesus states, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst." The parallels are striking, as both figures endure suffering and emerge as instruments of divine provision. Joseph's legacy also speaks to the fulfillment of prophecy. The story of Joseph is interwoven with the covenant promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In Genesis 12:2-3, God promises Abraham, "I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing." Joseph's role in Egypt is pivotal to the survival of this covenant nation during a time of crisis, preserving the lineage through which the Messiah would come. This divine orchestration illustrates God's faithfulness to his promises, not just in Joseph's time, but throughout history. Archaeological findings further affirm the historical context of Joseph's life. Excavations in ancient Egypt reveal a complex society with a well-established bureaucracy, corroborating the biblical account of Joseph's rise to power. The discovery of inscriptions and artifacts from the Middle Kingdom, dating back to around 2000 BC, provides insights into the administrative practices of the time. Joseph's management of grain during the 7 years of plenty and the subsequent famine aligns with these historical records, showcasing his wisdom and foresight. The Church has remembered Joseph as a figure of faith and forgiveness across the centuries. Early Church fathers, such as Origen and Augustine, highlighted Joseph's life as a prefiguration of Christ. Augustine wrote in City of God, "Joseph was a figure of Christ, sold for silver, but who, in his suffering, became the means of salvation." These reflections have shaped Christian theology, emphasizing the continuity of God's salvific plan throughout Scripture. In the New Testament, Joseph's life is often referenced in discussions of forgiveness and reconciliation. In Matthew 5:44, Jesus teaches, "But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." This call to love and forgive resonates with Joseph's actions toward his brothers, demonstrating the heart of the gospel message. It is a message that transcends time, urging believers to reflect God's grace in their relationships. The impact of Joseph's story extends beyond scripture and theology into the broader narrative of salvation history. His experiences parallel those of Jesus in significant ways. Both men faced unjust suffering, endured betrayal, and ultimately triumphed through God's plan. This thematic resonance has inspired countless believers throughout history to find hope and strength in their own trials, recognizing that God can bring good from even the most difficult circumstances. As the early church spread throughout the Roman Empire, the story of Joseph served as a source of encouragement amid persecution. Believers found solace in Joseph's unwavering faith and his ability to rise above betrayal. The narrative reminded them that God remains sovereign even when circumstances seem bleak. Theologians like John Chrysostom drew parallels between Joseph and Christ, illustrating how Joseph's life exemplifies the virtues of patience, humility, and forgiveness. In the Reformation, Martin Luther emphasized Joseph's role as a model of faith. He noted how Joseph's trust in God's providence amid suffering reflected the believer's reliance on grace. Luther wrote, "Joseph was a man who suffered much injustice, yet he remained steadfast in faith and ultimately received God's blessing." This understanding has influenced countless sermons and teachings throughout church history, reinforcing the significance of Joseph's life as a beacon of hope. The legacy of Joseph also extends to the liturgical calendar. His story is commemorated in various Christian traditions, often during seasons of reflection and penitence, highlighting the themes of forgiveness and reconciliation. The Orthodox Church celebrates the feast of Saint Joseph, recognizing him as a righteous figure whose life exemplifies the virtues of faithfulness and integrity. This acknowledgement of Joseph in the liturgical calendar underscores the enduring relevance of his story in the life of the Church. As the narrative of Joseph unfolds, it becomes clear that his life was not merely a historical account, but a divine orchestration of events leading to the fulfillment of God's promises. His story serves as a poignant reminder of God's active presence in our lives, guiding us through trials and leading us toward redemption. The legacy of Joseph resonates through generations, reminding believers that God is faithful even in the face of adversity. In contemporary Christian thought, Joseph's story continues to inspire believers to confront their own challenges with faith and resilience. His journey from the pit to the palace serves as a metaphor for spiritual growth, encouraging Christians to trust in God's plan amidst their struggles. In Romans 8:28, Paul reassures believers, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose." Joseph's life embodies this truth, illustrating how God's providence can bring about good from the most painful experiences. Joseph's legacy is not only confined to the pages of Scripture, but is deeply embedded in the fabric of faith history. His story shapes our understanding of God's character, revealing a God who is intimately involved in his creation, working through human actions to fulfill his divine plan. The themes of forgiveness, reconciliation, and divine providence continue to resonate with believers today, offering hope and encouragement in a world often marked by strife and division. In conclusion, the life of Joseph remains a cornerstone of biblical narrative, illustrating God's faithfulness and sovereignty. His experiences serve as a powerful testament to the redemptive work of Christ, foreshadowing the ultimate act of forgiveness and salvation. As believers